So first question I'm just going to ask you is, it feels like from everything, whether it was Rasheed Rice or even before all that stuff happened, that wide receiver seems to be the play. But do you feel like that's still what it's going to be at 32, or you think it could go a bunch of different directions?
I mean, I think that would be the ideal scenario for the Chiefs is to sit down, lock up wide receiver long term. They don't have a ton of guys under contract next year for their wide receiver room. And with Rasheed Rice's situation, that obviously makes things a lot murkier. I think that's the right spot to do it. This is a very deep wide receiver class from the top to the bottom there. So I can see them really prioritizing pick 32, using it on a wide receiver, make Patrick Mahomes happy there. I think that is the real spot that we're looking at is wide receiver pick 32 because I just think that the value is going to be too good. A guy available at 32 in this class would be a guy that might go early, 20s or even maybe 15 as high as that in other classes. It's just how good this class is. So maximize the fact that it's so good. Take a wide receiver at 32 in my opinion.
This feels different than just about every other Veach class because it felt like in free agency they would go through, they would try to fill all those holes, so then they would have flexibility entering the draft. It doesn't feel that way this year. Does it feel that way to you?
No, because they have a very clear hole at left tackle right now. Andy Reid even spoke to that in his presser that he did, the pre-draft presser that he's done, saying it's like Wanye Morris is a guy that we like, but we need to see more out of. So I think left tackle is still a very much a priority here. The wide receiver obviously is very unsettled. They're not locked in there. The trading of L'Jarius Sneed makes cornerback kind of a sneaky need as well. And then if you look into 2025, I know that offensive line is a spot that the Chiefs have been relatively good at over the past several years now. They could potentially lose all three of their interior offensive linemen through a Joe Tooney cut, moving on from Creed Humphrey in free agency if they can't get a deal done, and moving on from Trey Smith in free agency. Now, I expect at least one of them to be back, but they've got to think for the future. So there's a couple of sneaky bigger needs outside of wide receiver that they still need to go ahead and fill. And that's not been Brett Veach's MO in the draft. He's usually gone in and had a lot of these things solved. It seems like there's some pretty clear positions of need going into the draft this year. They also just happen to be positions that this draft is very deep in. So I don't think his hands are tied by any means, but it is a different approach for sure.
All right. So, I mean, obviously, I think the big three wide receivers are obviously going to be gone in Rome, Marv, Neighbors. It's been funny kind of over the last couple of weeks because I don't believe a single word anybody says this time of the year around these couple of weeks. But who do you think could be there at 32 as a wide receiver for the Chiefs? Then we'll break down some other positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas Jr. were guys that optimistically I would hope would be there for the Chiefs. And the more we get into this process, and even just coming straight out of the combine, so it's not even during Lion season, we've seen those guys be projected a lot higher. I think realistically, the types of players that are going to be available Troy Franklin, wide receiver out of Oregon, Keon Coleman out of Florida State, A.D. Mitchell might still be around at that point, another guy that could potentially fit. And then you're kind of dropping off into some of those other guys that have been largely round two conversation players, but still guys that would fit in Kansas City. Again, pick 32 is essentially a round two pick, so it's not a big deal if they draft one of those guys. But I think that those three are the big names that should be at the top of everybody's list. If you're locked in at a receiver at 32, those three should all be available to you for if you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
So, well, who do you
Yeah.
think at tackle kind of stands out to you?
Jordan Morgan is a name that I think that Chiefs fans should become a little more familiar with out of Arizona. I initially there were maybe some guesses that his arm length may be a little shorter. When you watch him play, it seems like he plays a little more compact, and we know Andy Reid likes longer offensive linemen. He came in with really good arm length, so it's going to be just about using them. He's a good football player that would fit in pretty well. Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU checks all the boxes for Andy Reid. He really does check all the boxes. The length, the athleticism, the size, all of that stuff just needs a little bit of growth into the position. I don't know if he's a day one guy, but certainly you feel good about him pushing Wanye Morris. The two of them being in a competition is going to make the best out of both of them. And then after that, then you're starting to fall off into, the Tyler Guytons, into the Patrick Pauls out of Houston's. Those are guys that, again, would have the athleticism, have the length, has the size, but maybe need a little bit more runway to reach their potential. And with this class, which is also a really, really strong offensive tackle class, if you're going to be gambling on upside, you're going to be gambling on, athleticism. There are some guys a little bit later in the draft that I would feel a lot more comfortable with. So if the board is good, Jordan Morgan is there, something like that. If you feel good about where you are with that, go ahead and take the tackle round one, try and solidify that position. Even a small trade up if a guy falls for some reason. Let's say that Olu Fashanu or Amarius Mims happen to fall into the early 20s, that's a worthy trade up to try and solve the left tackle position for the Chiefs moving forward. But if you miss out on some of those early guys, I think that the waiting period happens because you're still needing a guy with room to grow. It's not a year one starter that you're really locked in on. Go get another guy to develop a little bit later in the draft because they're kind of sprinkled throughout this year.
One thing about Kingsley, now this is completely arbitrary and I don't think it works, but I remember I went and covered the Sugar Bowl 2 years ago when it was K-State and Alabama, right? And you're seeing the teams warm up and it's Alabama. Like you understand what those athletes are and everything.
Mhm.
And I remember watching Julius Brents warming up for K-State. And I'm like, he's the one who athletically looks like he could be at Alabama, like his game thinks that it could translate. And he ended up having a pretty good rookie year. So this
Yeah.
year, I go to KU BYU because they were in Lawrence. And I was like, Kingsley looks the part as much as any player I've really seen. He's a huge guy, and the
Huge.
athleticism and everything. I'm really intrigued by him. But one position I know that you know really well is corners. So, do you think with the Snead trade, him going away, do you think that opens something up for them to maybe go corner a little bit earlier than what we thought?
Yeah, I think that it's on the table now. Before, I would have said, with L'Jarius Sneed on the franchise tag, you still got to take a guy in the draft just to give yourself that insulation moving forward. Now I could see if the board is right, you go ahead and make that move. Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama seem to be the more common names that could be available towards the end of round one. I don't know that that's a trade up scenario for the Chiefs. I think that would just be, you're sitting there at 32, the wide receivers you like are gone, the offensive tackles you like are gone. Why not go ahead and take the best player on your board that might be a corner? I could see that happening. Realistically, I'm on corner watch in round two. Max Melton out of Rutgers is a super athlete, just an absolute crazy athlete, tested through the roof. This team has done a really good job of identifying those really supreme athletic testers and handing them to defensive backs coach Dave Merritt and saying, hey, go make the most out of this. And they have time and time again. Starting in round two, I can see it, the values right there, but I've got a lot of focus on rounds 4, 5, 6, 7. Brett Veach has lived in those areas with defensive backs recently, and he's had so much success with it. L'Jarius Sneed was a fourth rounder with crazy, athletic testing. Shamari Connor came in last year, played really well. They have high hopes for Najee Johnson, who 2 years ago was a seventh round pick, but also has this athleticism and was taking reps away from two more day three picks in Joshua Williams and Jalen Watson that have been integral to the success of this defense over the past 2 years. So they've got a pretty good room right now. I could definitely see them targeting another super athlete just because the track record is there for them and Dave Merritt of developing those guys. And you can find some of those guys again in day three this year. But man, it's going to be tempting for them if a guy like Max Melton is on the board, at pick 64. It's going to be really tempting for them not to pull the trigger on a guy like that has the tape and the athleticism. He would play immediately for this team.
So for people who don't know, you came up with this kind of matrix in itself, the CBAT kind of rating. Kind of for people who don't know, kind of break that down for us a little bit, and then the Chiefs have kind of not saying they're looking at your CBAT testing, but like when they've gotten a lot of tier one guys, correct?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that I came up with Oh, let's see. I think about 6 years ago, and I was looking at historical data. So I've got it back to 2010. I've created a weighted formula that factors in size, length, speed, explosiveness, agility, all of these elements that translate to playing cornerback in the NFL. And I weighted them appropriately. And I came up with this thing and I said, let's see how it works out, several years ago. And it has been incredibly predictive since then of success. It's not just round one players, it's all the way down to UDFAs. In the NFL right now, any cornerback that is drafted has a 32% chance of being a contributor during their rookie contract. Playing a lot of games for a team, playing a lot of snaps for a team if you're a nickel corner and you're not starting as much, but you're still very much contributing to the team. Now, all of a sudden, if you go to these tier one players, it's the upper 10% of the players, again, regardless of the round they're drafted in, 75% of them become contributors in the NFL. 20% of them go to the Pro Bowl, and another 10% of them become all pros since 2010. That's ludicrous. That's a crazy hit rate. So there are 6 guys in this year's draft that are there, and they're spread throughout. I'll give you one of them. Round one, Quinion Mitchell out of Toledo. The Chiefs had no shot at drafting him. He's probably going top 10. But there are several others like a Max Melton, Ryan Watts, who played a little safety at Texas. It sounds a little bit L'Jarius Sneed. I'm looking at him potentially in round 4, all the way down into some round 7 guys that have this athletic testing. Obviously, the tape doesn't necessarily tell you that this is going to be a great NFL player, but time and time again, this formula has kind of proven that, yeah, this works, and you can count on it a little bit more. So the Chiefs have definitely targeted these types of players over the past several years. They haven't drafted anybody below tier 2 since Brett Veach has been in the program. So I would highly expect them to go try and find another tier 1 or high tier 2 player, because those are the guys that have just traditionally worked out for them.
For sure. And I think because I believe that any pick in the first round, like at best, your odds are like 50-50. And when your CBAT numbers are even higher than that, it doesn't matter if it goes to like that's why I like giving you so much credit about that testing, because it's very uncommon to find something that's even feels three-quarters of a like certainty.
Yes, it really is wild. It's my favorite thing to do during draft season. My favorite thing to do as part of the draft guide that we publish at KCSN, because it surprises me sometimes. There are guys that I look at that I've watched on tape that I've gone, oh, I'm not sure that really is a super athlete. Then all of a sudden it pops. And it's okay. Well, I need to go back and watch that guy again. I need to find out why. Is it the scheme? Is it something about him that's not allowing that to shine? And can NFL teams, can Dave Merritt, defensive back coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, can he maximize that? And he has, just time and time again, he has. So take the high ceiling super athlete, put him with a coach that has a track record of developing it, and it just works. Again, L'Jarius Sneed was a tier 1 guy that was a round 4 pick. Najee Johnson is a tier 1 guy that hasn't been able to show it yet, but was stealing reps away from other starting cornerbacks from this team last training camp. It just pays off time and time again.
One thing, and this could be any position, but I loved how, even going back to your guys' Arrowhead Pride days, how you guys would have the lottery tickets kind of segment where
Yeah.
we would see who in the deep rounds, it'd be a chance, just take a chance on them and it might work out. Who's like your favorite, if there could be one, your favorite lottery ticket in this year's draft?
My favorite lottery ticket in this year's draft is Penn State center Hunter Norzad. The Chiefs need an interior offensive lineman. They really prioritize guys that have played tackle and they like to move them inside, unless, it's like a Creed Humphrey that's been there forever, or a Trey Smith that's been there forever. But they like drafting those types of guys as depth and then moving them inside. Hunter Norzad went to Penn State, played there for 2 years. Before that, because he is a super senior, he played through COVID and all of that, had to deal with all of that. He played 4 years of left tackle over at Citadel. So he's got this versatility, goes over to the Big Ten and performs really, really, really strongly. Go turn on the tape, him against Illinois, going up against a round 1 pick, Johnny Newton. did really well, held his own, passed off, the games that they ran and things like that up front. There are some not great things on tape, especially against Ohio State. He got handled a little bit, but that is a worthy swing, in my opinion. A guy that just has that level of versatility, was able to showcase really well at the East West Shrine game down in Dallas this offseason. So he's a guy that I think his arrow is pointing up, but is flying a little bit under the radar again because it's such a good offensive line class. I would take a swing on that guy late in day 3 and just feel really comfortable about him as a depth piece and a potential starter next year if they have to move on from a bunch of guys.
All right, and I kind of want the same thing, but I want your wide receiver who's a little bit of a deep cut that we aren't talking a whole lot about because that
Oh,
feels like the
man.
most talked about position right now with this team, and
It
I just need to
really
get your thoughts
does.
on this.
Yeah, it really does. A couple of guys, Ryan Flournoy out of Southwest Missouri State, was able to go to the combine. Coming from that school, that's a big deal. He's a good athlete. He's put a lot of stuff on tape for a smaller school guy to get that kind of presence. That's a very positive thing for him. I think the Chiefs would like a guy with his sort of upside in there. Cornelius Johnson out of Michigan has flown a little bit under the radar, really kind of bigger wide receiver, good catch radius, good hands, pretty crisp and clean as a route runner, is able to, kind of maximize what he's done. Not a super athlete by any means, but a guy that you can fit in as an X wide receiver, get him to do some of the things that they've been trying to do with like a Justin Ross lately or something like that. It might be a little light for light, but a good camp battle guy that you could try and take a stab at in day 3. But probably my favorite guy, and he's going to go a little earlier than some of these sleepers traditionally do. Malik Washington out of Virginia is probably my favorite player in the entire class. Like, I absolutely adore him as a wide receiver. He does everything that the Chiefs want out of a wide receiver. He's a little smaller guy. He's 5'8", but he's very, very well built. He's going to handle the rigors of catching passes in the middle of the field. Going to take some hits and be able to pop up because he's a bigger while being smaller guy, but has a natural feel for settling into zones, great route spacing. That's very important for a team that runs as many option routes as the Chiefs do, and has a little after the catch juice, a little bit of speed as well, and just really secure hands and a really clean, hardworking prospect. He just fits a lot of things that the Chiefs would really like to add to their wide receiver room right now. Probably a late round 3 pick in the current draft. Again, that's how good this wide receiver draft really is that a guy that's going to be able to come in and play in one of the NFL's best offenses immediately could be drafted in round 3. He's probably my favorite player in the entire draft for the Chiefs.
I hope everybody heard that. Craig Stout loves receivers that are under 5'10". He loves it, and he wants the Chiefs to only have wide receivers that are under 5'10".
Hey, listen, I'll take it, man. I take it with that skill set. I don't care what size you are. Just go up and get it.
Yeah, for sure. I assume are all those players you just mentioned or that we've been talking about? Are they all in the KCSN draft guide?
They absolutely are. They are in the KCSN draft guide. We put this out every single year. It's 229 players have write-ups on there, but we have a top 300 board ranking all of these players. Every single one of the write-ups has a little bit of a player bio about it, gives you their height, weight, speed, their combine testing numbers and things like that. The grade that we have put on them, they've got strengths, weaknesses, and the best part about it, how they fit with the Chiefs. And some of these players just don't. There will be low fits that are in there. There's just, hey, they're probably not looking at this guy because of certain criteria, whatever the case may be. But it is a really detailed analysis that I get to be a part of. We got a full team that's working on it now. It's not just 3 of us that were writing it as we were back in the day. We got a full team working on it now. But it's a really valuable resource. All of the CBAT stuff that we talked about earlier, that's in the draft guide. You can go and look and see who all those players are, who the Chiefs might target. There's another section in there about defensive ends that might fit Steve Spagnuolo's thresholds. That's all in there as well. It is a really valuable draft resource. So if you are a Chiefs fan, if you are about the draft, go search for the KCSN draft guide. You can go pick it up. It will give you access to our Substack and all the things that we're doing at KCSN if you buy it as well. So it really is a bargain at twice the price. So go out and get it.
All right, perfect. I only have one more question, and it is, I would feel like the Chiefs fans would not question these teams' decisions as often as they would after back-to-back Super Bowls. But do you have any kind of message as we get ready for draft time for Chiefs fans as they get ready to watch guys who they wanted get drafted by other teams, who they might not have liked go to Kansas City? Like, what is your kind of message to Chiefs fans right
You have Patrick LaVon Mahomes. That's the real thing that matters here. I mean, think of it this way. Last year, before you get upset about the round one pick, last year the Kansas City Chiefs took a developmental defensive end who could still absolutely be a very quality player in the Chiefs rotation. I'm not running down Felix Anudike-Uzomah. He's a great player, worthy stab at that position. He barely played for this team, and they won the Super Bowl with a wide receiving core that was one of the league's worst. It's always going to come down to the health of Patrick Mahomes. It's always going to come down to what they can do with Patrick Mahomes. So know that whatever the case may be, no matter how upset or how excited you get about it, it really does boil down to you have the best quarterback in the history of football playing for your team right now. So just relax and know that your fate is in the right hands right now.